and welcome to your news brief. I wasn't planning on doing anything today. I've just spent the last 2 days in a hospital looking after a friend. But today Sony has come out and basically rocked the world with a new camera announcement. The camera is called the Sony A9. You'll see a picture of it here. Now the A9 is Sony's answer to Canon and Nikon's sports cameras. Canon has a top of the line professional camera called the 1DX2, camera I actually shoot with. Nikon has a D5, their top of the line professional camera, meant for sports and action shooting as well. Sony has never had this previously, or at least nothing to compete with the Canon and the Nikon offering. Today, everything has changed. Let's go over some of the specs of the cameras. You'll see a quick comparison list popping up here, but I'll go over them very quickly. The Sony has a 24.2 full frame stacked CMOS sensor. Sony says this is the world's first stacked CMOS sensor in a full frame body, and what this allows it to do, without getting too technical, is transfer data faster. The Canon is a 20.2 megapixel full frame sensor and the Nikon has a 20.8 megapixel full frame sensor. Now the Sony will shoot at 20 frames per second. The Canon shoots at 14 frames per second, or if you switch over to live view, it's 16 frames per second. The Nikon shoots at 12 frames per second and its version of live view will go up to 14 frames per second. So think about that, 20 frames per second with a 24.2 megapixel sensor is huge. Just by specs, that blows away Canon's top of the line and Nikon's top of the line. That's absolutely huge announcement. The Sony has 693 all selectable autofocus points. The Canon by comparison has 61 fully selectable autofocus points. 41 of those, however, are cross type. The Nikon D5 has 153 selectable autofocus points, 99 of which are cross type. None of Sony's autofocus points are cross type. But 693 autofocus points, that's a 93% of the sensor coverage, which again just blows Canon and Nikon out the water. Now in the rear of the camera, Sony only has a 1.44 million pixel touch screen. Canon has a 1.62 million pixel touch screen. Nikon, however, has a 2.4 million touch screen. ISO range. The native ISO range for all three cameras is 100 to 51,200. However, in expanded mode, the Sony goes from 50 to 2,004,800. By comparison, the Canon goes 50 to 409,600. The Nikon goes from 50 to a staggering 3,280,000. Now, as everybody knows, these expanded ranges, especially the high-end expanded ranges, are virtually useless. Shutter speed. The Sony has a 1/8,000th of a second mechanical shutter, just like the Canon and the Nikon. However, the Sony also has a 1/32,000th of a second electronic shutter, which Canon and Nikon don't have. The Sony now sports 2 SD card slots, which is the first in the Sony Alpha series cameras. So one of the big downfallings of previous Sony cameras and why professionals wouldn't really pick them up is they only had a single SD card slot. The Canon by comparison has a CFast 2 card slot and a compact flash card slot, 2 slots. The Nikon, you've got options, but the one that everybody goes for is a dual XQD card slot. Now, what does this mean? The Sony, you get a standard UHS 1 SD card slot and a new UHS 2 SD card slot. Currently, the fastest card you can get for the Sony has a 260 megabit write speed, a 300 megabit read speed, which is equivalent to a 2000 times card. The Canon 1DX Mark II, on the other hand, has a 600 megabit read speed, a 460 megabit write speed, which is equivalent to 3600 times. And on the XQD front, the Nikon, it has a 440 megabit per second read speed, a 400 megabit per second write speed, which is equivalent to 2933 times. The Sony also enjoys a 5-axis in-camera stabilization. Now, what does this mean? Well, Canon and Nikon have in-lens stabilization. Canon calls it IS, and only certain lenses have it. Same on the Nikon side. With having a 5-axis in-camera stabilization on the Sony, that means every single lens you put on the camera is image stabilized. Now, on the video front, Sony has 4K 30 frames per second video. The Nikon has 4K 30 frames per second video. The Canon does 4K 60 frames per second video. Where the Sony is different, however, is both the Canon and the Nikon have crop factors. The Sony doesn't. It reads the full frame sensor. Essentially, you're getting a 6K video downsampled to 4K. You're reading the full frame sensor. Now, going back to the write speeds, what this translates into is the Sony will take 362 JPEG files before the buffer runs out, basically before you have to stop shooting. It will take 241 RAW files before the buffer runs out. Now, if you think about it, at 20 frames per second, you're getting essentially 240 shots. You're getting 12 full seconds worth of shooting. Just hold down that button for 12 full seconds. The Canon has a 170 frame buffer for RAW files, but unlimited JPEG. You can take as many JPEG shots as you want until your card fills up. The camera will never slow down, and you can do that at 14 frames per second. The Nikon has a 200 buffer RAW file continuous shooting speed, and once again, unlimited JPEG. So although the Sony can shoot faster and it takes bigger photographs, but Canon and Nikon do actually beat them out. And part of that is going to be the write speed of the cards. SD cards will not compete with CFast and XQD cards. At least they don't at the moment. So although you're getting 2 card slots with Sony, and Sony likes to keep things small, which is why they put the SD cards in there, they would have actually been better going for an XQD card rather than a UHS 2 type SD card. That's just my opinion, however. Now, Sony does like to keep their cameras small, hence why I think they went for the SD card slot rather than XQD cards, although XQD is not much bigger, but the CFast cards and compact flash cards are a lot bigger than SD cards. Bigger the card slot, the bigger the camera. Now, what do I mean by small? This is a 1DX Mark II, Canon's top-of-the-line professional camera. This, on the other hand, is a Sony A7, a full-frame mirrorless camera. Look at the size. There's a huge difference between this and this. Now, also with the size comes weight. This and the A9, the new camera, which is only slightly bigger than this, will weigh a lot less than one of these. This is a heavy camera. Now, one of the major complaints that everybody has had with the Sony A series cameras is battery size. The Sony batteries, along with the camera, they're tiny. As an example, this is the battery from the Sony A camera. This, on the other hand, is the battery from the 1DX Mark II. Massive difference. This you can easily shoot all day, more than all day with. This you're going to need to change out 3 or 4 times to shoot all day, if not more. It doesn't last very long, especially if you're shooting video. The good thing about these, however, is because they're so small, you can easily slip 2 or 3 into your pocket. You can't really do that with one of these. It's too big. Now, Sony has corrected the problem with the batteries, so they say, and have come out with a slightly larger version of this. It's a new type battery. It is larger in size, not by much again, but Sony says it's 2.2 times as powerful as one of these. Basically, it will last 2.2 times longer than one of these for a not much bigger battery. That was one of the major complaints about the Sony cameras. Another major complaint about the Sony cameras, and why a lot of professionals didn't go to them, was the lenses. Now, Canon and Nikon have been in camera business for years, and they've got a lot of lens choices available to them. Sony is fairly new into the full frame market, especially the A series cameras. They've only been around for 3, 4, perhaps 5 years maximum. As such, Sony doesn't have the lineup of lenses that Canon and Nikon does. It is getting better. Sony's just recently came out with a 70-200 f2.8 lens. That's equivalent to the Canon 70-200 f2.8 2L series lens. However, Sony doesn't have things like the wide angle, the 11-24mm lenses. But in conjunction with the announcement of the A9, Sony has announced a 100-400 f4.5 to 5.6 G Master lens. G Master lenses are their equivalent to the Canon L series lenses. And this lens is in direct comparison with the Canon 100-400 f4.5 to 5.6 2L lens, a lens that I have and use a lot. You need a lens like this if you're shooting sports. Now, most professional sports photographers will use a 400mm f2.8 lens, or a 400 f4 constant aperture lens, and some will even go for the 600mm f4 constant aperture lens. Something Sony, as of yet, hasn't released. Now, these lenses are for professionals only, and usually come in around about the $10,000 upwards mark. Something else that A9 has that the Canon and the Nikon don't have is the Sony A9 has an electronic shutter. If you remember going back to the specs, you can now get a 1/32,000th of a second shutter speed if you use the electronic shutter on the Sony A9. It's only 1/8,000th of a second if you use the mechanical shutter, which is the same as the Canon and the Nikon, but using the electronic one you get 1/32,000th of a second. Now, one of the major problems before with the electronic shutter was you get a phenomenon called rolling shutter. This has been a major problem with electronic shutters to date. However, from the quick introduction video that I saw from Sony today, It seems that they've either completely eliminated this phenomenon or at least reduced it greatly. However, bear in mind, this is a marketing video by Sony, and they're not exactly going to show you bad things about the camera. So a quick recap of the major specs of the new Sony A9. It's a 24.2 megapixel full frame stacked CMOS sensor. It shoots at 20 frames per second. It does 4K 30 frames per second full frame video. It has 693 autofocus points, 93% sensor coverage, 100 to 51,200 ISO settings, expandable from 50 up to 2,004,800. It has 2 SD card slots, one of them being UHS 2, the other being standard UHS. Its battery is bigger and will last 2.2 times the size of a normal Sony Alpha battery. Has inbuilt 5-axis stabilization, so all lenses are image stabilized, and it will shoot 241 RAW files at 20 frames per second before its buffer runs out. That's a full 12 seconds of continuous shooting. The camera goes on sale in June. You can pre-order the camera next week. And lastly, the price. This camera, this 1DX Mark II, Canon's top of the line camera, you can now pick up for around $6,000. The Nikon D5 top of the line camera is around $6,200. The brand new 20 frames per second 24.2 megapixel Sony A9 sports camera is only $4,500. That's over a $1,500 difference between Sony's new top of the line camera and Canon and Nikon's. That's a huge gap. I hope you enjoyed this new quickie and you learnt something about the new Sony camera. I had to do something. It's such a huge announcement from Sony and the spec sheets are absolutely massive. I don't have my hands on the camera. As I said, the camera doesn't get released until June, so we're just going to have to wait and see if the camera itself lives up to the spec sheet. If you like this video, please subscribe below, and I'll also put a link to the Sony spec sheet for the new A9 camera. Take a look at it. This camera is immense, and I'm a Canon shooter. I love Canon, but this camera is a potential game changer.